Hi everyone, it's Holly and I'm back with another smash horror trash, and this one I thought it was going to be easier than it was. I don't know, but I tried to organize things, but I kept like moving things around so I'm not sure how coherent this is going to be. Today we're going to talk about Cinderella, or it can be called like Revenge of the Neglected Daughter. That's like one of the classifications of it as well. Cinderella is a centuries-old folktale. It is found all around the world. There's a lot of differing opinions on where the original story comes from. I think there's a very old Chinese version. There's definitely a very old Greek version, but I think it is really just one of those things where it's a universal story, and so it shows up across like all cultures across the whole world. So I will put on the screen somewhere, maybe here hiding my vacuum, the versions that I read or reread for this video, so that you have like an idea of what some of my background is. Now, full disclosure, I'm pretty sure my first exposure to Cinderella was the Disney animated version. I don't actually know that to be a fact, but I assume it is. But I have also read a lot of these folktales before for school, and I had read some other retellings as a kid, like books and stuff that my mom had purchased for me. I also wrote my own version of Cinderella in college for my fairy tales class, because we had to write our own story, and I always had this idea that I hated Cinderella, so I wanted to rewrite it in a way that I would like it. Yeah, that's somewhere. I don't know where. But I have a bound copy of my class's stories. So anyways, but we'll get into, does Holly really hate Cinderella, in a moment. Probably not a moment. So Cinderella is typically about an oppressed daughter, who obtains like ultimate joy and happiness, and a reward. She usually ends up getting all of this through getting married. There are two main types of Cinderella stories, and the changes come mainly from who the villain is in the story. So the first one is the one that you still see a lot today, and is the one I think most people think of when they think of Cinderella stories. And that is when the mother or stepmother is the villain character. You have your wicked stepmother. Then the second version is called the erotic father character. This is where the mother still dies, but then instead of a woman coming in and replacing the mother, the father basically wants his daughter to replace his mother, or replace her mother, his wife, who has passed away. Ooh. So why don't you see this version now? Probably because incest makes us super uncomfy. Because it is uncomfy. You know. Also, there's some ideas that maybe it's not seen a lot today or it's kind of fell out of favor a while ago, because it makes you question parental authority, and when you're trying to teach kids to behave, you don't want to teach them the parents are the bad guy, right? I don't know. I think it makes sense that it could fall out of favor for that reason, but it's probably the incest. Probably. So some common features you'll see across a lot of these stories are things like mistreatment by family or family members, whether it be a parent, a sibling, a step-parent, loss of mother, whether it happens before the story or during the story. Mom pretty much always dies, or mom is the villain. Sometimes mom is the villain. There's also often a helper character. You would think of this today as your fairy godmother character, and sometimes they are kind of fairy-like or magical creatures, and other times it's the deceased mom, or it's some sort of other like interventionary character. Cinderella often runs away from her situation. There's running of some kind. It is usually an extended run and then a hide, but it could also just be a momentary run, like hypothetically at midnight. A lot of times there are important clothing or other kind of like accessory elements. So your glass slipper is the one I think a lot of people know about. It can be a ring, it can be a dress, something like that. It's usually has some sort of emotional or magical element to it, and it's also pretty much always an identifiable characteristic for Cinderella. Cinderella herself is often a humbled character. She could become a servant or be treated like one. She is often very sympathetic and caring and kind. Not always. Sometimes she can be aggressive on her own, but pretty much I would say more often than not she is that have courage and be kind character that we know now from Cinderella, like the live action Disney version. There's often an important event, and it is very regularly a ball. Now, one thing I did notice is a lot of these stories, the ball isn't one ball. It's often like a multi-night event that Cinderella is going to and usually sneaking into. Like a lot of folk tales and fairy tales, they can be pretty gruesome. A lot of times, whether it's the treatment of Cinderella or treatment of the villain character, the villain can be punished by other characters, other creatures, or by Cinderella herself, either directly like condoning the violence or just allowing it. There's also like the cutting off of body parts to like fit into slippers and stuff. Oh, it's so gross. There are some overriding morals to these stories. So it's often seen as kindness is being rewarded, humility being rewarded. It could even be just that cunning and intelligence saves the Cinderella character. Also, a lot of times people think that the Cinderella story is often talking about the changing of a family dynamic, which honestly, I hadn't remembered learning about that or reading that in college, but I think that's an interesting observation. I think a lot of times fairy tales, especially when they surround women of like Cinderella's age, like marriageable age, it's often about going into marriage. Like I think a lot of Beauty and the Beast stories are about going into a marriage to somebody you don't know and they could be horrible and like trying to make the best of it. This, while marriage does frequently play a role in these stories, I don't think it's actually about the marriage. I think it is about family changing. You have a parent being lost, a lot of times a new parent coming in, and how that changes the dynamic and how you have to react to that dynamic. I think that's an interesting conversation, and I do think that that is a major like part or role of the Cinderella story. So other observations that I just generally made while reading the versions I was reading for this, specifically the like old folktale versions, not like modern day retellings and adaptations. Perrault, I took one semester of French. Listen, French is not a language for me, okay? I do not speak it well. I mean, I barely speak English well, and I've been speaking that since I was like 2. I was a very late bloomer. He has 2 versions, but one, Donkey Skin, in my opinion, definitely views women as very manipulative creatures. Like it's almost showing that like her happily ever after comes from being a manipulative person. And I think you're supposed to take out of it that like she's a bad person, but that's not really what I got out of it, but like that's what he wants you to get out of it. I think the Disney version again dominates society, like Beauty and the Beast, but I don't think it's as strong of an impact as Beauty and the Beast was. Also, a lot of people view Cinderella as a passive character with no agency. But I think that that's a very narrow view, and I say that as somebody who I think that's how I viewed it as well. And now, having reread these, done more research, read more retellings, I think I just believed that because society told me that. Because I don't think Cinderella is a passive character. I think that she actually does have a lot of agency, and she may be in a difficult situation and she may lose a lot of her agency, but she fights and defends herself in the majority of these stories within the like confines that she has. And I've come to really appreciate the Cinderella character. And now I'm mad that society made me hate her. But I'm also my own person, and I could have made my own decision on my own, and I should have just been more open-minded. So the books we're going to talk about in this video for retellings of Cinderella, a lot of these were like rereads for me, so that was fun, are Ella Enchanted by by Gail, Carson, Levine. A Kiss at Midnight by Eloisa James, An Offer from a Gentleman by Julia Quinn, Cinder by Marissa Meyer, and Geekerella by Ashley Poston. And then for film adaptations, we're going to talk about the Disney original animated feature. I'm not going to do the live action reboot. If I ever revisit Cinderella, I will do it then, although I will tell you briefly, I think it's an amazing like version of it. I think it's definitely my favorite Disney live action. It's a high quality film. Ever After with Drew Barrymore, and then, oh, your girl's childhood favorite Cinderella, the Rodgers and Hammerstein Cinderella, starring the wonderful Brandy, Whitney Houston, Bernadette Peters, Whoopi Goldberg, Jason Alexander, Victor Garber. This movie is full of amazing people. I haven't rewatched it yet. I bought it on DVD. I'm so excited. It's on Disney Plus though, if you want to check it out. I loved this as a kid. I'm really afraid to rewatch it. What if I hate it? I'm not gonna hate it. It's fine. It's got geniuses in it. It's got true artists. Where can you go wrong? Okay, it's fine. Let's move on. So now let's start talking about some retellings. So now let's talk about A Kiss at Midnight by Eloisa James. So this is a historical romance. It is the first book in her Fairy Tales retelling series. These stories aren't really set in a specific historical time period. They're more like historically inspired. I've read this 3 or 4 times now, and I have given it both 3 and 4 stars depending on how I feel about it when I'm reading it in the moment. My current thoughts are it's enjoyable but nothing special as a book. I did read it on audio this time. The audio wasn't my favorite. The characters, you have Kate, who is your Cinderella character. She has an evil stepmother and she has a stepsister who's not evil. She's just a little flighty. And then you have Gabriel, who's actually a Russian prince, and he is impoverished and is trying to help his family. Now, Gabriel, his personality is not really there. A lot of his personality is just loving Kate, and I'm not here for that in my romance. Let's talk about it as a retelling. So Kate's father remarries and then he dies, as happens often in these stories. Her stepmom really only cares about her own daughter and doesn't care about Kate. She goes on to treat Kate like a servant and to speak down to her and everything. She's not as mean as some evil stepmothers, but she's not nice either. The plot is progressed by the fact that her sister ends up getting injured and Kate needs to pretend to be her sister to get the prince to okay her sister's marriage to somebody else. It's kind of weird. There are glass slippers. They're just like really fancy, like silk, I think, slippers that can only be worn once because they're so fancy, and it's like what her sister is known for. She does have a godmother, not of the fairy kind, but of the traditional baptismal kind, and she didn't know about her godmother, and then she meets her at a house party and her godmother decides to try and help her get out of her bad situation and find a husband, because that's how things worked historically. You had to have a husband. She does ultimately end up getting her happily ever after. So some changes from your original source material. The stepsister is not a mean character. Again, like I said, she's kind of on like the flighty side, and she isn't like, but she's not a mean person, you know? She doesn't mistreat Kate. She doesn't really work with her mom to demean her or anything like that. Gabriel, while I do think that he lacks a lot of personality, he does have his own story. He is impoverished. He has saved a lot of people from his household in Russia who have been kind of like cast out because they don't fit the requirements that his brother wants from people, and so he's trying to protect them. And I do appreciate that he is given a character and is given a story. He's just kind of bland. Smash or trash? I'm going to say smash. A mediocre one, but a smash nonetheless. You can definitely tell that it is inspired by Cinderella. You have certain, like, those important, like, story beats or features so that you see the inspiration, but Eloisa James still makes a point of making it her own story, and I appreciate that. in a retelling. Now let's talk about Ella Enchanted by Gail, Carson, Levine. And I am specifically talking about the book here. Later this year, you will see me discuss this book as an adaptation of itself, like the adaptation version of it. So stay tuned for that. But for now, we're just talking about the book. So it's a standalone fantasy. It is middle grade and it's a classic. It is definitely a childhood favorite of mine. It still is an amazing novel. I still give it 5 stars. It's awesome. Ella Enchanted is about a girl, Ella, who in the world that she lives in, fairies give like blessings, gifts to babies when they're born, and she unfortunately is given a gift by the fairy Lucinda, who gives her the gift of obedience. So she has to obey every command that is given to her. And her mom and her like house fairy are the only ones that know that she has this curse. This is not a gift, it's a curse. And make her promise to not tell anybody about it. Because they don't think it's fair that she has to do this and listen to everybody no matter what they tell her to do. And they try to get Lucinda to take the gift away, but she won't. Some similarities between this and source material. So Ella does ultimately lose her mom in this story. Maternal death, very frequent feature. She does have a fairy godmother, Lucinda, even though she's not a helpful woman. She still exists. She also has a helpful servant character, whose name now escapes me, and I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry that your name escapes me. There is Prince Charming. His name is Prince Charmant, but he goes by Char, but I feel like it's definitely because Charming. There are glass slippers as well. There are multiple balls. I think it's 3. 3 tends to be pretty common in these stories, and I think there are 3 in this one. There is a happily ever after, and Ella does have an evil stepmother with evil stepsisters. So some differences, sort of. So initially my reaction is, well, loss of agency. But like I discussed in the intro, I think that a lot of Cinderella is about Cinderella losing her or not having agency because of the world in which she lives in, but then finding power where she can within those limitations. And I think that this is a really good example of that. Instead of it being more subtle, it's more in your face, but like in the best possible way. Because Ella has to be obedient to every command given to her, you're very aware of her loss of agency, but it also makes you more aware of when she does gain power and when she does like find her way around the rules that are guiding her. Char, again, I've talked about this before, he has personality. So your Prince Charming character, he is a character, and I love Char. I think he's great. He's like a great friend to Ella, and I just love him. Char, you were done dirty by the adaptation, I'm so sorry. But he is such a great character, and again, I love when you have the love interest who normally doesn't even get a name in these fairy tales and folk tales, ends up being like their own character. The romance is friendship based, so like you see it grow from becoming friends and then falling in love with each other, and it's not just like this sudden meeting, falling in love at first sight, which I actually prefer over love at first sight. Smash or trash? Smash. Oh my gosh. Again, you see the inspiration, you definitely see the source material, but Gail Carson Levine does an amazing job with making her own story and making you invested in Ella's story, and she goes places and she travels. There's ogres and like are they elves? Gnomes? I think they're gnomes. I don't know. There's different lands, there's languages, and this book is less than 250 pages, and she puts so much into it and she explores so much. And as a 32-year-old woman, I got just as much out of this as I did when I was like 13 years old reading it as a kid. And I would highly recommend it. And I think it might be my favorite Cinderella retelling. It's amazing. Read it no matter what age group you are, but especially if you have like a young girl, like a young daughter, or just any young girl in your life, I highly recommend giving this book to them. I think it is such an inspiring story. So now we're going to talk about Cinder. And Cinder is a YA sci-fi story. It is the first book in the Lunar Chronicles series by Marissa Meyer, and each book in the series actually kind of retells a different fairy tale, and this one is Cinderella. This was my second time reading this. I give it 4 stars if you're interested. And this book, I don't know if it was ever pitched this way, but this book is 100% Cinderella meets Sailor Moon. Like, it is nothing other than those two things. And I don't say that as like a negative, it's just what it is. So Cinder here, it's futuristic. She is a cyborg living in New Beijing, and so she was born a human, but she has cyborg body parts. So like one of the things that she has is she has a cyborg foot, which that's kind of where you get this like the glass slipper kind of vibe. You have a missing foot kind of a vibe thing, sort of. It makes sense in the book. And you can like see her foot in the cover. She has a stepmom, sort of, like she's really adopted, so like her dad adopts her, and then but technically her stepmom, I guess. And 2 stepsisters, one who's good, one who's bad. Again, this is part of this reoccurring thing that's happening now, where a lot of times there's one good stepsister and one bad stepsister. I think I talked about that in a different retelling. She is a mechanic, which causes her to be like dirty and greasy and grimy a lot, and she's expected to do a lot of work for her family. So it's like that spin on that servant. She's still kind of a servant, but instead of it being like a historical set situation, it's futuristic. It also gives her a skill that she has in being a mechanic, and she's very good at it. She wants to run away, which I think I said this in the background information. Running away was actually a very common thing to happen in these fairy tales. So there's obviously like the running away after the ball, that is very common, and you do see that in a lot of adaptations and retellings. But what you don't see is the other running away. So a lot of times the Cinderella character does run away from her family to escape her situation, and either that's how she ultimately finds her joy, or it puts her in another bad situation. There is a prince, it's Prince Kai. He's the prince of Eastern Commonwealth, I think. I don't know, it's escaping me. Anyways, and he does have a personality. This is something I've talked about before, about how the prince character, a lot of times they don't even have names. But here, not only does he have a name, he has a personality, he has internal conflicts, especially as the series progresses. But I'm specifically talking about the book Cinder right now. And he and Cinder get to know each other like over the course of the book, which is something I personally really like, especially if I'm expected to kind of root for a romance between characters. And while so much of this book is about Cinder's personal journey and to a lesser extent a romance, there is a larger story outside of those 2 plot points. There is a larger villain that has nothing to do with the wicked stepmother. There is bigger stakes that are part of this larger series, and that's not something you definitely see in a lot of retellings, because typically retellings are just like one and done and everything. So this is very different in that situation, like in that way. There is a ball, there is a glass slipper, sort of, like I said. Yeah, so I think that there's like these little tweaks and changes to make it sci-fi-y, but also to make it more modern, you know. So smash or trash? Smash. The Lunar Chronicles is not my favorite, like just as a series. I enjoy them, but I don't love them. And actually I liked Cinder a lot more the second time around than the first time I read it. But I think, especially now looking at it so closely to having reread like Cinderella retellings, Cinderella stories and other retellings, I feel like Marissa Meyer does a really good job of taking that source material and kind of like finessing it to tell a new story. And so yes, I think she did a very good job of a retelling, I think. Now we're going to talk about Geekerella by Ashley Poston. Are you going to jump up here? Make up your mind, sir. Okay. This is a YA contemporary. It is a standalone, sort of. It's part of a companion series with 2 other retellings. One's Beauty and the Beast and one is Princess and the Pauper, I think. This is the first one. I gave this 4 stars as a book. I thought as a book, I wasn't super into it for like the first 150 to 200 pages. And then I got really invested towards the end. Now I will say in like the last year, 18 months, YA Contemporary and I have not had the best of relationships. So take that part with a grain of salt. So 4 stars was a great rating from me for a YA Contemporary. So this follows Elle, who is a teenager. She's a fangirl of this TV show called Starfield, I think. It's kind of a cult classic TV show, and I kind of think of it as like Firefly meets BSG, because it was like a show that was on forever ago, like before she was born. It was only on for like 1 season, probably 2, because I think there was like 45 episodes. That's like 2 seasons. And it got canceled, and it has this cult following. So original BSG, Firefly, and the show is going to be rebooted as a movie. And she blogs about this show, and she has a lot of emotional connections to it because it was something she and her father and her mom died when she was very young, had like a relationship with. And her parents were into cosplaying for the show, and she and her dad would do like cosplaying and stuff, and her dad created a con for it. Dorian, which is the prince hero character, is an actor, and he actually gets cast as the lead character in this reboot. And Elle does not like him, and they end up kind of meeting but not knowing who each other is / are. And things progress from there. So as a retelling, so Elle, she's lost both of her parents at this point. She has a stepmom who's very mean. She has 2 stepsisters. One is very cruel. One is more of that, like, she doesn't want to be cruel but kind of just goes along with things. I think I said this in another video. There seems to be in a lot of modern day retellings, like things written now, where we seem to, for whatever reason, be avoiding having all of the other like female characters basically be negative, toxic people. And so you have this like one good stepsister. That seems to be like a huge trend. Is treated pretty poorly by her family, and she works for this food truck. I can't remember what it's called, but it's like the something pumpkin. It's a bright orange food truck, so that's like your pumpkin from like the Disney movie kind of connection. And instead of going to a ball, she does go to the con, and so she's gonna cosplay there. That's like her dress, like her outfit, her fancy outfit. And there is also a ball there. There's like a masquerade ball. The fairy godmother is kind of her friend Sage, who she knows before the book starts. Sage works in the food truck. It's her mom's truck. But they kind of build a friendship, and Sage really likes designing clothes, and she knows how to sew, and she's helping Elle a lot with getting her clothes created. And there's like a lot of other things that Sage does that I think really shows her as being that fairy godmother character. There is, so I'm gonna say something that I feel like is potentially a spoiler, but it does happen in a lot of Cinderella retellings, and it's something that's like really, I feel like, from the Disney version, and it shows up here. And I knew it was gonna happen and it's still really hard. It's like, it was one of the hardest scenes to read, and it's something that really bothers me whenever it happens in any of these like retellings or adaptations, and that's like the destruction of the Cinderella character's clothes. So she usually has, you know, these special clothes. There's some sort of like clothing or artifact or something that is special for her, and in a lot of them it's clothes. It's a dress or some sort of outfit. And in a lot of these movies and retellings, her family destroys that item of clothing. And in a lot of times, these things are coming from the family she's lost. So like Cinderella, it was like her mom's wedding dress, the Disney version. I think it was her mom's wedding dress. I know it was like her mom's wedding dress in Ever After. And then it gets destroyed. And that scene is always incredibly hard for me to read. I think it's become standard, like I kind of expect it every time. But it's just like, to me, that's like a specific level of cruelty that's just really messed up. Here you do have Dorian and Elle, so your Cinderella and Prince Charming character, getting to know each other throughout the whole of the book, which I really like. Dorian also has like a character, it's told in dual POV, so you get both of their perspectives and both of like their backstories and everything, which I really appreciate. I would say this is very closely tied to being inspired by the Cinderella version. I don't know if it actually was, like if Ashley Poston sat down. Like, I don't know how she wrote this and how she structured it, like what her intention was, but it feels like it was very much inspired by the Cinderella version. Not a complaint, just an observation. And I really liked the addition of the friendship between Elle and Sage. I think that that is missing in a lot of these. Like, I love a good friendship in my stories, so obviously I'm a sucker for it, but I think a lot of times, especially in stories like this where there's so much other stuff going on, a lot of authors don't take the time to build a friendship, and I just really appreciated that she was willing to put that in there, and I think it was wonderful. Also, there's no like magic or anything, it's just straight YA contemporary. I don't know, was that clear? We'll see. So smash or trash? Smash. I really liked it. So the next retelling we're going to discuss is An Offer from a Gentleman by Julia Quinn. Now, I have to say, I'm kind of afraid to even talk about anything Bridgerton related at this point, because Bridgerton has become such a cultural thing in our world in the last few months. And I think more people are searching for Bridgerton content, and like, I don't know. So it's very intimidating. Like, I actually saw, like, I did a Bridgerton review a couple of years ago, and it suddenly had a bunch of views, and I don't look at my analytics very often. And that was like a surprise. I was just checking something else, I think, and I saw that, and I was so now I'm very intimidated. So yeah, but we're going to talk about it. So An Offer from a Gentleman is by Julia Quinn. It's historical romance. It is the third book in the Bridgerton series. This one follows Benedict Bridgerton, who is the second Bridgerton. Our heroine, our Cinderella character, is Sophie. She is an illegitimate daughter, and after her father passes away, her father never really like cares for, like, he takes care of her as a responsibility, but it's not a particularly loving relationship. It's not toxic or anything, but it's not loving. He passes away, and her kind of stepmother takes her in, or like allows her to stay living with her and her two daughters. So she has two stepsisters, and treats her like a servant. And the two stepsisters, there is one bad stepsister and one good stepsister. And I haven't noticed through a lot of these that, especially the more modern a retelling or adaptation comes to be, I feel like you see more of this dynamic where you have one stepsister who's mean, like traditionally, and one who is kind of stuck in the bad situation as well, and actually feels for Cinderella and offers her some sort of compassion, and is often rewarded for that compassion herself. And I think that that comes from a desire in our society to not necessarily view all women other than the Cinderella character as negative people, and whether that's conscious or subconscious, I think that's what's going on. So a lot of times you have, it's kind of this extension in my mind of the like virgin whore dynamic. So in a lot of classical literature, fairy tales, things like that, you have this, you can only be one or the other. Women are not complex, they're not difficult, they're either good or they're bad, and that's it. And I think it's a growing out of that concept, if that makes sense. I don't want to go into too much detail on this, but it's not something I've really looked into. It's just like an off-the-cuff observation I've made through all of these. She does end up going to a ball. It's a masquerade ball. She sneaks into it, where she meets Benedict Bridgerton, and they're both immediately smitten with each other. So insta-love-esque, but I think that Julia Quinn rides that line fairly well. And ultimately, Sophie makes the decision to run away from her toxic home environment, and she becomes a maid. This is actually very standard in a lot of the Cinderella stories. It's not in a lot of adaptations that I've seen, but it does happen a lot. A lot of times where I feel like I remember seeing them was when the father was the toxic person, and so Cinderella would run away from her father and then end up as a servant. So it's kind of this combination of the two types of stories. She ultimately ends up meeting Benedict again, and then through a variety of plot points, I don't want to like spoil this book for you, you know, happily ever afters pursue, justice is, you know, delivered, and kindness is rewarded. And Sophie is most definitely a very kind and caring character. She tries to make the best of her life and her difficult circumstances that she finds herself in. So some like differences, kind of things. One is Benedict. I've talked about this in other videos and other parts of this video. He is your prince character, and he has a personality. He's a human being. He says words. So that doesn't always happen in these, but he has a personality. And I've also discussed agency before in relation to Cinderella, and how I think a lot of people think Cinderella doesn't have agency, and how I think that actually she does have agency and we're just like not looking for it. But I think if you feel like Cinderella characters typically don't have agency, I think you might like Sophie. Hers is also a slightly subtle agency, but I think it's done very well, and it's subtle, but it's obvious enough. In that she's in a ton of very difficult situations with her family, with her job, with her place in society as an illegitimate child, and like what kind of limitations that puts on her. But she is still very strong-willed, very independent. She stands up for herself. There are a lot of conversations between her and Benedict where he like does not understand her situation and why she would make the decisions she would make, because she's trying to make the best decisions for her life and for her future. And he's just like, but like, just do this. And she's like, I understand that you're saying that and you think that makes sense, but our situations in society are completely different. And she really does stand her ground, and I think a lot of people would respect her. I think this is one of the more popular Bridgerton novels. It is definitely, I think it's my favorite now. Benedict is a little toxic. He does have some kind of negative behavior traits, just as like a warning. I think in general this is my new favorite. It's always been one of my favorite Bridgerton novels, but I think it's my favorite now. Sorry, Kate and Anthony. I mean, you'll always hold a spot in my heart, but... And I think a huge part of why I really enjoy this book is, and I've read it countless times at this point, is because of Sophie and because of who she is as a character and how she embodies what I've come to realize is the Cinderella character, but I just had a misconception of what that character was for a very long time. So... smash or trash? I mean smash, obviously. As of filming this right now, I want you to know I have filmed several, because I film these as I like finish these books and movies. they've all been smashes so far. And like, I have a feeling they're all going to be, and I don't think that's ever happened. And I'm so excited. Apparently, I am a Cinderella fan, and I didn't even know it. Oh my gosh. So for this one, I'm gonna put on these ears that I got in Disney World that I affectionately am calling my Cinderella ears because I feel like they look like her dress. So I don't wear ears a lot in like my book videos, but I do have a Disney Channel if you're interested. Always linked below. So now we're going to talk about the Walt Disney animation full feature film of Cinderella. So this was done by Walt Disney Pictures, and it was released in 1950. And this is specifically an adaptation of the Perrault, still don't know how to say it, version of the story. Cinderella, I also don't know how to say that. That one semester of French did not stick with me at all. I think too much Spanish learning. And so the French could not overpower the Spanish that I learned for like 6 years. So like a lot of other Disney adaptations, I think that this is a lot of people's like formative or like default adaptation. Now this one is specifically interesting because it is not like the first adaptation of this story. There have been adaptations long before this, but I think because it's a cartoon, it's often the first one that people are exposed to because people are like showing their kids cartoons. So you're probably gonna see this before you see like, I don't know, do people watch older adaptations? Like I saw The Glass Slipper a bunch as a kid, but I'm not sure how many other people saw those. So while I watched The Glass Slipper a lot as a kid, I also remember watching this a lot as well. I had it on VHS and I would watch it. And I know I had a Cinderella like costume. I also had a Jasmine one. I think those were the only two I had. This is a fairly faithful adaptation. You got your wicked stepmother, your two wicked stepsisters. Shout out if you're ever in Disney World and you meet them. They are a gem to meet. I love them. They're all great. You've got your Cinderella is a very nice girl. She's, you know, she lost her dad. She's treated as a servant and goes to a ball after, like, she gets invited to a ball with everybody else. You know, it's the big prince, he's got a ball. The prince has no personality, which is pretty standard for fairy tales. She has a helper figure. Here it's your fairy godmother. She gives her glass slippers. There are animal helpers. That does happen in a lot of the source material. Not all of them, but a lot of times there are animal helpers. They're not like always talking, and you know, they're not all mice and everything, but there are animal helpers. That's not unusual. There is an instant love between the prince and Cinderella, and that is again something that you see a lot in the source material. It's not something you see in a lot of adaptations now, because I don't think that's something that like our culture really wants, our society, I guess. And ultimately there is a happily ever after. You see all of the standards of a Cinderella story here. There are some differences. Obviously it's a musical. That makes sense. You can't really have like a musical written tale, although like hypothetically in oral tradition and stuff there could have been musical elements. I don't know. I wasn't alive thousands of years ago, so I cannot comment. And this movie does have some memorable songs. I don't think it's Disney's most memorable song game, but I feel like if you hear them, you know them. Like, obviously Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo I think is a lot of people's like the one that they know the most from this, which is Fairy Godmother's song. But I think So This Is Love is probably one that people know but don't know that they know, if that makes sense. For me personally, A Dream Is a Wish Your Heart Makes is like my favorite from the movie, 100%. Also, this movie does a really good job of incorporating some great side characters. I will say objectively as a movie, because I hadn't watched this probably since I was a kid, I think this held up. It was still good. I still enjoyed it. But I think Cinderella herself falls a little flat. When I think about this movie and I think about moments that I like or scenes that I like, I don't think of Cinderella herself as being a part of any of that. I think of Anastasia and Drusilla, who are the wicked stepsisters. I think of my main boy Lucifer, who is the cat. And I think of some of my favorites. Jack and Gus Gus. I've had this for years. It's an ornament, but I keep it as decoration. I love Jack and Gus Gus. They're like some of my favorite side characters in any Disney movie, especially Gus Gus. We stan Gus Gus. I actually had a dog named Gus Gus. Sort of. His name was Angus, and I didn't like that name, so I refused to call him that, so I called him Gus Gus. But I think that they are like standout stars, and I think a lot of people feel that way about this. People, I don't think of Cinderella herself very often, and you definitely don't think of the prince. I think the prince is a throwaway character here, which again is standard for these stories, and it's also standard for Disney adaptations of this time. These princes who have no character, they very rarely have a line. They just are existing almost as part of a larger story. And so I find that disappointing, but it is natural for the story, I guess. I don't know. So, smash or trash? Smash. I think this is a very faithful adaptation while adding some cute, unique additions. I think that the Disney company did a really good job of making a interesting, fast-paced movie that kept you engaged, and I think that both children and adults can appreciate it. Now obviously I don't know 100% because I've only seen this as an adult, having seen it as a child. So I'd be interested to know about adults who have like never been exposed to it, and then what do they feel about it as an adult. But I still enjoyed my time re-watching this. Like, I still had fun, I still cared, I was still invested. I think that the animation holds up, and I think that the characters hold up. You know, I think Jack and Gus Gus are just as adorable now as I thought they were when I was little. So I'm here for it. So now we're going to talk about the Rodgers and Hammerstein's Cinderella adaptation. And I'm specifically talking about the Brandy version. I've never seen the other version, perhaps the original. It was also a Broadway musical. I've not seen either. I did vaguely look some stuff up, and I see Julie Andrews may have been in the original, so maybe interested now. But Murphy and I stan the Brandy version 100%. And I actually listened to some of the original Broadway cast recording, and I just like the vocal choices in this version better. But I'm sure part of that is just it's what you're exposed to first, that kind of thing. Anyways, so this was released in 1997. It was a made-for-TV movie, and can I take some time here to talk about this movie as a movie and like what it did, because I did some research before this. I usually go on like the Wikipedia page for the movies just to like confirm the director, and like this I confirmed it was made for TV, which I was pretty sure because that's how I watched it, A Wonderful World of Disney, and I had it recorded on VHS and I would rewatch it all the time. So, but I wanted to confirm that like it hadn't been like released in theaters or something and I just didn't know about it. The director is Robert Friedman. I'm sorry, Mr. Friedman, I don't know who you are, but good job for you. But I actually learned some really interesting stuff about this movie. You can skip over this for like a few minutes if you want, because it's not really going to be about it being a Cinderella adaptation. It's just interesting to me because this movie came out and was made in the 90s, and are you trying to bite the buttons off my sweater? And it did a lot of things that, shall we say, Hollywood says that they cannot do. And I just question if they're lying, which, I mean, I always thought they were lying, but I feel like this movie proves that they were lying. So, first of all, this movie apparently was originally meant to have Whitney Houston star as Cinderella, but it ended up getting like backburnered for a little while. And then once Disney finally came back around to it and deciding to greenlight it, Whitney Houston decided she was too old for Cinderella, and so they decided to offer the role to Brandy, which was probably a good move. This would have been like in the Moesha time period. I'm pretty sure Brandy, I knew who Brandy was. In 1997, I was like 9. So it's not like I had like a huge worldview or anything. And, sorry, did I just cough in your face? So rude. And then what they decided to do was, and I assume they offered Whitney Houston the fairy godmother role because she plays the fairy godmother. But it was a blind casting, apparently. And that's a huge part of why this movie is so diverse. And so this movie, like, this is one of the reasons I have always really loved this movie, is because it's so colorful. So it's colorful in like its costume design, with the exception of Cinderella, which like helps her be like a stark contrast. And the prince in a lot of ways is more subtle too. I'm sure that was intentional. But it's very colorful in the costumes, in the set decorations. It's like very vibrant and loud, like very aggressively loud. But I love it. But it's also very colorful in the characters, like in the actors, and in a way that makes no like genetic sense, but like you just don't care. So like, for example, Bernadette Peters, who is a goddess, plays the wicked stepmother and does a great job, by the way. So if you don't know who Bernadette Peters is, that's fine. But she's white. Well, the two stepdaughters, one is like a taller, thin white girl, and then the other is like a shorter, at least in relation to the other girl, bigger black woman. And like, but they're family, and it's a complete non-issue. It's a complete, like, it doesn't matter. For the prince, I don't know what his actual ethnicity is, but he's like Hispanic or Latino of some kind. And then the king is Victor Garber, who is white. And then the queen is Whoopi Goldberg, who, if you don't know who Whoopi Goldberg is, like, that one I feel like you should probably know. That, like, Whitney Houston, you should probably know who those people are. But Whoopi Goldberg is black. And so, and I just like love seeing it. Like, it's just amazing. Like, there's so much diversity in this movie, and there's diversity in like the extras, like there's like big dance numbers and stuff, and there's diversity there and everything. There's body diversity, like ethnic, racial diversity. It's beautiful. You love to see it. You love to see it. So anyways, moving on to the film. Like, I guess that was about the film, but you know what I mean. So this movie feels a lot like filming of a staged Broadway musical. Not quite like if you've seen Hamilton, that's like legit filming of a staged Broadway musical, but this is obviously filmed on very few sets, and I would assume a lot of the staging is very similar to how it would have been performed on Broadway. It just feels like that to me, like it has that vibe. And a lot of the sequence, like the dance sequences and stuff feel very much so like a stage production. And these are not complaints. I loved it. So this is on the shorter side. It's like just under 90 minutes. And that does mean that there's less development, I think, in a lot of things. So it really relies on you having a existing understanding of Cinderella, like kind of expecting who all these characters are. There is a wicked stepmother. There's 2 stepsisters who are wicked. Although I feel like wicked is a strong word. In this movie, they're bad and like they're kind of mean to Cinderella, but they're not really cruel. So that's nice. The prince, he doesn't have a name, which is kind of funny. We're throwing it back old school with that one, I feel like. Which makes sense because the original Rodgers and Hammerstein is pretty old, so makes sense there. And then Cinderella is very much so just like a nice girl. She's very meek and humble in here. She's not like a fighter really at all, which I think you see a lot of now in adaptations, but I wasn't bothered by her. It didn't feel like she wasn't a human being or like a person. She just was very gentle. But this movie does do a really good job of kind of giving character bits to like the king and the queen. Like that's one of the things I really like about the Disney animated is like the king is really funny, and here I think Whoopi Goldberg and Victor Garber do a really good job of like taking like the little bits of moments that they have and like playing off each other and making you feel like you know these characters, even though really there isn't. Like if you actually sit back and think about it, you don't know that much about these two, but they do such a good job being these characters and embodying them that like you feel like they're more developed than they actually are. And there is a fairy godmother. This has like an insta-lovey element, which is definitely very common in the original fairy tales. Like that's very common. You don't have like developed love stories or anything. These 2 characters meet, they fall in love, and then there's a glass slipper and they live happily ever after, you know, those kinds of things. It's lovely. I am so glad that this movie still made me so happy. It totally held up. I remembered so many parts of it, like just not just like songs. Like every time somebody says the word impossible, I literally sing like Impossible, the song, in my head, and which is like the fairy godmother song in this movie. But I like remembered, like it just came rushing back to me a bunch of the other songs that like I had completely forgotten. Little moments with Jason Alexander. He is amazing in this as well. They're all amazing. They all of the actors do such a good job with their characters, like bringing these characters to life. And there's so many like side characters that are like stealing the show, but like because they're all doing such a good job of stealing the show, like nobody steals it. Like it's so weird. But it 100% works. I love it. Smash or trash? Smash, obviously. I'm not sure how much I really talked about it being an adaptation, but I just really love it. I highly recommend it. It's on Disney Plus if you've never seen it. Check it out and then watch you like hate it and think I'm a horrible person. But I think it's an amazing film. Now let's talk about Ever After. Ever After was released in 1998 and it was directed by Andy Tennant. It stars Drew Barrymore. The other like leading star of it is Angelica Houston, who happens to play the wicked stepmother in this. This is kind of a historically set Cinderella retelling. It's set in France. The accents could have fooled me, but you know, it's set in France. And it's kind of told as a frame story with the Brothers Grimm. So the Brothers Grimm go to see this older woman, and she tells them this story of Cinderella and how it is a real story and what the real story is. And then you're like taken into the past where you hear the real story about Danielle, who is Cinderella. You also have some historical figures like Da Vinci showing up in this movie. I do want to say that I have loved this movie for a very long time. I actually like grew up watching this with my stepdad. Why did my stepdad love this movie so much? I have no idea. We never talked about it, but we would watch it a lot. And I remember shortly after graduating from college, I was living at home and I had a TV in my bedroom, but we didn't have like cable or anything into my bedroom, so I could only watch stuff on DVD, and I would sleep to this movie, and every night I would play it and I would just go to like the last scene I remembered playing, and I did that for months. So this movie and I have a long history, and it is currently on Disney Plus. They must own it. I don't know, it was weird, but it was helpful because it was super, that I didn't have to like dig out my DVD copy and I could just watch it on there. So I do have like a lot of nostalgia around this movie, although I never thought about the accents before watching it this time, and I was like, what is going on here? Also, one of the wicked stepsisters, the actual wicked one, the blonde girl, Marguerite, is that her name? I think that's, yes, I think Marguerite is the mean one. She is actually, that actress is in The Will, which is an adaptation of a Kristen Ashley book on Passionflix. Anyways, moving on to the actual movie. So like I said, Danielle is our Cinderella character and has a very good relationship with her father, and he brings home a new wife who has 2 daughters, and then he dies and she gets left with them, and her stepmom is very mean to her, treats her like a servant. Her one stepsister is equally mean. The other one is nice, like wants to be nice to her, but also is kind of mistreated by her mom and sister. She ends up meeting the prince, and there's like a mistaken identity thing where like she doesn't tell him who she is, but like he also doesn't. No, she does know who he is eventually, but they kind of have like this like banter, and she's kind of aggressive towards him, and he kind of likes it because he's like, oh, somebody's not just treating me like I'm special. They ultimately meet some more. She puts on a fake identity, wearing fancier clothes, and they get to know each other, kind of are falling in love. There's a ball, her identity is revealed, there is a happily ever after, her mean family is punished. Sorry if I'm spoiling this for you, it's over 20 years old. There's no fairy godmother, but I think her servants and Da Vinci kind of fill that role here. There's also no magic. This is completely straight historical fiction. There's some like very subtle humor. I would call this kind of like a romantic drama. You know how like romantic comedy, but a romantic drama, but with some humor to like lighten things up every once in a while. Da Vinci is the source of a lot of that humor. Her like nice stepsister has some cute scenes with like a guard that I just love. Those little, just like little teeny tiny scenes, and I just love them. I eat them up. There's tons of great side characters here, really. And the acting, like, while the accents are really bad, like they should have just gone no accents, I think that the acting is actually very good in this movie, which I appreciate. Yeah, is there anything else? I don't know, Murphy, is there anything else? Yeah, you don't know either. So smash or trash? Smash. I think it's a really good adaptation. I think that they do a really good job of having the original characters, setting it in a historical time period, adding things to make characters feel a little bit more developed, but also it feeling like a historical Cinderella story. So those are all of my thoughts on Cinderella, several of its adaptations and retellings. This might be one I revisit again, but I'm not committing it this time. But thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!